It all started on a chilly weekend evening in Chicago, Illinois. John and his wife Emily had been married for only 5 months, but already their lives had settled into a comfortable routine that they both cherished. John worked long hours as an architect, while Emily, a high school teacher, enjoyed her evenings planning lessons and grading papers. Despite their busy schedules, they made it a point to spend every weekend together, away from the stress of work and city life, exploring the parks, streets, and cafes of Chicago. On this particular Friday evening, they returned from their offices feeling the usual mixture of fatigue and anticipation. John had wrapped up a demanding project, and Emily had just finished her grading. As they drove home through the bustling streets lined with skyscrapers and twinkling city lights, they talked about nothing and everything. Plans for the weekend, silly jokes about their coworkers, and even ideas for their future home. It was during these drives that their bond felt the strongest, filled with laughter, companionship, and shared dreams. Once home, they freshened up, had a light dinner, and began their usual ritual of planning the evening stroll. Chicago's winter had settled in, bringing a crisp chill to the air, which made cozy scarves, warm jackets, and steaming cups of coffee an essential part of their outings. John suggested they go for a walk at Lincoln Park, a place they often visited but never really explored fully. Emily agreed, her curiosity piqued. She loved the quiet of the park in the evenings, the distant rustling of leaves, the occasional sound of a jogger or dog walker, and the soft hum of the city far away. Their weekend outings weren't just casual strolls, they were moments of connection, of discovering new corners of the city together. Emily adored how John would sometimes challenge her to notice things she usually overlooked, the way a street lamp cast shadows on the pavement, or how the icy river reflected the fading sunlight. These small observations made their walks feel magical, almost surreal, and reminded them both why they had fallen in love in the first place. That evening, as they prepared to leave, there was an unspoken excitement between them, a sense of anticipation that something different might happen. Emily adjusted her scarf, making sure it covered her ears from the biting wind, while John double-checked that his gloves were on. Their hands brushed together, and for a moment, the world outside seemed distant and irrelevant. It was these little touches, these small shared moments that made their marriage feel intimate and alive. Little did they know, however, that this simple, familiar routine of walking in the park was about to take an unexpected turn. The ordinary evening they had been so accustomed to would soon change into a night they would never forget, a night where every sound, every shadow, and every step would hold a sinister significance. But for now, all they felt was warmth in each other's company and the gentle thrill of venturing out into the cold, crisp Chicago evening, unaware of the chilling events that awaited them just beyond the familiar paths of Lincoln Park. After their cozy dinner and warm coffee, John and Emily decided to head to Lincoln Park, a place they frequently visited on weekends but rarely explored fully. The winter air was crisp, carrying the faint smell of pine from the park's evergreen trees and the occasional whiff of nearby bakeries. The sun had long dipped below the skyline, leaving a soft twilight that made the city lights shimmer across the icy paths. Emily pulled her jacket tighter around herself, while John adjusted his scarf. Their hands brushed as they walked, a small, comforting touch that made them both smile. The park was unusually busy for a winter evening. Families strolled with bundled-up children, couples held hands along the frozen pathways, and joggers passed them in rhythmic strides, leaving faint puffs of vapor in the cold air. John and Emily found a bench near a quiet corner of the park, a spot that offered a view of the small frozen pond and the dark outline of the city skyline beyond. They sat down, letting the serene sounds of the park, the crunching of snow underfoot, the distant laughter of children, and the occasional honk from the streets envelop them. After a few minutes of enjoying the calm, they decided to walk along a path they had never taken before, curious about the section of the park that branched off toward the northern edge. The path was narrower, lined with leafless trees whose skeletal branches stretched toward the dark sky like ghostly fingers. The moon peeked out from behind clouds, casting silvery light over patches of frost-covered grass. There was something different about this corner, a quiet that felt almost too deep, too complete. Emily glanced at John and felt a slight shiver run down her spine, though she tried to laugh it off. As they ventured further, a faint sound reached them. At first it was almost imperceptible, a soft, melodious hum, like someone singing in a low, soothing voice. Emily stopped, tilting her head. "John, do you hear that?" she whispered, her eyes scanning the darkened path ahead. John listened carefully and nodded, trying to rationalize it. Maybe someone is rehearsing a song for a video or recording. People do that sometimes in quiet corners of the park. But even as he spoke, a small part of him felt uneasy. The sound was strangely alluring, almost hypnotic. Emily, drawn by the voice, began to step closer toward the source. John, still on the phone with his cousin, noticed her movement out of the corner of his eye and called after her, "Emily, wait!" But she didn't seem to hear him. The further she went, the clearer the sound became, a gentle, eerie melody, not quite a song he had ever recognized. The trees around them seemed to stretch higher, shadows lengthening unnaturally, and the wind whispered through the branches in ways that sounded almost like hushed voices. By the time John ended his call and turned to follow her, Emily had already reached a small, isolated clearing they had never noticed before. The area was eerily quiet now, except for the faint glow of a single lamppost flickering nearby. The ground was uneven, and the air carried a strange, earthy scent, as if the soil itself had been disturbed after a long time. And there, standing near the lamp, was something that didn't belong. A shadowy, human-like figure, dark and undefined, its presence sending a chill that pierced through the warmth of John's jacket. John's heart raced. He rushed forward, calling Emily's name. The melody suddenly cut off, leaving an oppressive silence that seemed heavier than the winter air itself. He reached her just in time, grabbing her hand before she stepped closer to the shadow. At that moment, the first seed of real fear took root. The ordinary evening stroll had turned into a night that neither of them could have imagined, a night where every sound, every shadow, and every step would hold a sinister significance. But for now, all they felt was warmth in each other's company and the gentle thrill of venturing out into the cold, crisp Chicago evening, unaware of the chilling events that awaited them just beyond the familiar paths of Lincoln Park. The moment John grabbed Emily's hand, the temperature around them seemed to drop sharply, as if the park itself had exhaled something cold and unnatural. Emily blinked rapidly, her expression shifting from calm curiosity to confusion, then fear. "John, what just happened?" she asked, her voice trembling. She looked around as if waking from a deep sleep, clearly unaware of how far she had wandered from the main path. The flickering lamppost behind her buzzed loudly, its light pulsing in uneven intervals, casting distorted shadows across the ground. John pulled her closer, placing himself between Emily and the shadowy figure. His heart was pounding so loudly he was sure Emily could hear it. The figure near the lamppost did not move, yet its presence felt heavy, oppressive, as though it was watching them without eyes. The air smelled damp and metallic, like rust mixed with wet soil. John tried to convince himself that it was just a trick of light, maybe a tree stump or a park structure shaped oddly in the dark. But the longer he stared, the more the shape seemed to shift, subtly changing, stretching, breathing. Suddenly, the lamppost went out. Darkness swallowed the clearing completely. Emily gasped and clutched John's arm, her nails digging into his sleeve. In the silence that followed, John heard something that made his blood run cold. Soft footsteps circling them, slow and deliberate, crunching lightly against frozen leaves. The sound wasn't rushed, it was patient. Whatever was there knew they were afraid, and it seemed to enjoy it. "Don't move," John whispered, forcing his voice to stay steady. He fumbled in his pocket, searching for his phone. His fingers felt numb, refusing to cooperate. When he finally managed to turn on the flashlight, the beam cut through the darkness in a narrow cone of white light. The clearing appeared empty, no figure, no movement, just trees, frost-covered ground, and the silent lamppost. For a brief second, relief washed over him. Then Emily screamed. John spun around to see her staring at the ground, her face drained of color. In the beam of the flashlight, deep impressions were forming in the soil, people's footprints. But they were wrong. Too long, too wide. The shape resembled human feet, yet the heel dragged unnaturally, as if whatever made them didn't walk the way people did. One by one, the prints appeared, slowly advancing towards them, though no body could be seen. The air grew heavy, pressing against John's chest, making it hard to breathe. Emily began to cry softly, repeating his name over and over like a prayer. John backed away, pulling her with him, his eyes never leaving the ground. With every step they took, the footprints followed, stopping when they stopped, moving when they moved, mocking them. A low whisper suddenly brushed past John's ear. It wasn't a voice he recognized, yet it spoke clearly, in a tone both gentle and terrifying. "Don't leave." John felt a sharp pain in his head, like something pressing against his thoughts, trying to slip inside. He shut his eyes and shouted, "We're leaving!" more to himself than to whatever lurked there. Grabbing Emily tightly, he turned and ran, ignoring the burning in his lungs and the pounding of his heart. Behind them, the whisper turned into a soft, distorted laugh. They didn't stop running until the sounds of the city returned, the distant traffic, voices, and life. Only then did John dare to look back. The path behind them was empty, as if nothing had ever happened. But the fear stayed, clinging to them like a shadow, following them home and marking the true beginning of something far darker than a single night in the park. By the time John and Emily reached their apartment in downtown Chicago, neither of them spoke. The elevator ride up to the 7th floor felt unbearably long, the hum of the machinery echoing in the cramped space. Emily stared straight ahead, her reflection in the mirrored wall looking pale and distant, as if part of her was still back in the park. John noticed her hands trembling slightly, though she tried to hide it by clasping them together. When they finally stepped inside their apartment, John locked the door immediately, then checked it again, twice. The familiar scent of their home, lavender air freshener mixed with the warmth of heating vents, should have brought comfort. Instead, it felt wrong, almost artificial, as if the apartment was only pretending to be safe. Emily slipped off her shoes slowly and walked toward the living room, her movements oddly mechanical. "John, sit down," he said gently. "I'll get you some water." She nodded but didn't respond. As John poured water in the kitchen, he heard a soft thud behind him, followed by the faint scrape of something dragging across the floor. His pulse spiked. He rushed back to the living room to find Emily standing near the balcony door, her forehead pressed lightly against the glass. Outside, the city lights flickered against the dark sky. "What are you doing?" he asked. "I thought I heard someone calling me," she replied in a flat tone. "From outside." John felt a chill crawl up his spine. Their apartment was 7 floors up. He gently pulled her away from the door and guided her to the couch. She drank the water without blinking, her eyes unfocused. Minutes passed in silence, broken only by the ticking of the wall clock. Suddenly, the lights flickered, once, then twice, before stabilizing. John told himself it was just the old wiring in the building, but the air in the room felt heavier, thicker, like before a storm. John winced and pressed his fingers to his temples. "My head hurts. It feels like someone's inside my thoughts." Before John could respond, the hallway light switched on by itself. John stood frozen. He was certain neither of them had touched the switch. Slowly, the bedroom door creaked open, inch by inch, releasing a cold draft that carried the same damp, earthy smell from the park. Emily's breathing became shallow, her shoulders tensed as if she was listening to something John couldn't hear. Then she spoke, but it wasn't her voice. "Why did you take me away?" John's blood ran cold. The tone was low, strained, layered, as if two voices were speaking through the same mouth. He dropped to his knees in front of her, gripping her hands. "Emily, look at me. You're here. You're safe." Her head snapped toward him unnaturally fast. Her eyes looked darker, almost hollow. For a split second, John thought he saw something move behind them, like shadows swimming in deep water. She began to cry, but even her sobs sounded distorted. The clock on the wall stopped ticking. From the corner of the room, a faint scratching noise began, slow, deliberate, like nails dragging across wood. John felt a crushing pressure in his chest, an overwhelming sense of being watched. He wanted to scream, to run, but he couldn't leave Emily. Wrapping his arms around her, he whispered prayers he hadn't spoken in years. As suddenly as it started, the scratching stopped. The lights returned to normal. Emily slumped against him, unconscious. John held her for a long time, shaking, knowing deep down that whatever followed them home hadn't left. It had only found a new place to hide, and it was waiting.
That night, sleep never truly came to John. Even after Emily regained consciousness and insisted she was fine, he could sense something was deeply wrong. She lay beside him in bed, eyes closed, breathing slow and steady, yet her fingers twitched occasionally, as if reacting to dreams she couldn't escape. The apartment was silent except for the low hum of traffic far below and the faint ticking of the clock in the living room, which had mysteriously started working again. At exactly 2:32 a.m., the doorbell rang. The sharp sound sliced through the silence like a blade. John's eyes flew open. Emily sat up instantly, as if she had been waiting for it. They stared at each other, fear mirrored in both their faces. The doorbell rang again, longer this time, deliberate. John slipped out of bed and grabbed his phone, switching on the flashlight. His heart pounded so violently it made his ears ring. He moved slowly down the hallway, each step heavy, as if the floor resisted him. When he reached the front door, he leaned in and whispered, "Who is it?" No answer. He checked the peephole. The hallway outside was empty, illuminated by the dim yellow building lights. No footsteps, no shadows. The silence felt intentional, mocking. Just as John reached for the lock, the doorbell stopped. Relief washed over him, but it lasted only seconds. A loud bang echoed from the balcony door, followed by another and another. Emily screamed from the bedroom. John ran back to her just in time to see the sheer curtains billow inward, though the glass door was tightly shut. The room felt freezing cold, their breath faintly visible in the air. "John," Emily whispered, pointing toward the floor. There, leading from the balcony toward the hallway, were wet footprints. They were enormous, dark and uneven, as if pressed by something incredibly heavy. Water dripped slowly from them, pooling on the hardwood floor. John followed them with his eyes, his stomach twisting. The footprints stopped right outside the bedroom door. Then, slowly, one more print appeared, forming by itself. Emily began shaking uncontrollably. "It's here," she sobbed. "It didn't stay in the park." John wrapped a blanket around her and tried calling 911, but his phone's screen flickered before going completely black. The lights in the apartment dimmed, then surged, then dimmed again. From somewhere inside the walls, a low humming sound began, almost like breathing. Suddenly, the front door handle started to turn, not violently, gently, testing. John stood between the door and Emily, his entire body trembling. He shouted for whoever was there to leave, his voice cracking with fear and desperation. The handle stopped moving. For a moment, there was silence. Then came a soft knock. 3 slow taps. Emily collapsed to the floor, clutching her ears. "Make it stop! It keeps calling my name!" The knocking faded. The humming stopped. The footprints began to evaporate, disappearing as if they had never existed. The apartment returned to normal, too normal.
By morning, there was no sign of forced entry, no water, no damage, but the fear remained. John knew with terrifying certainty that this wasn't a random haunting or a bad night. Whatever had followed them home was intelligent, patient, and deeply attached to Emily. And it wasn't finished. Morning arrived quietly, almost deceptively normal. Sunlight filtered through the apartment windows, casting warm, golden streaks across the living room floor. For a brief moment, John allowed himself to believe that the terror of the night had been nothing more than exhaustion and fear feeding off each other. But the tight knot in his chest refused to loosen. Emily hadn't slept. She sat at the edge of the bed, staring at the wall, her eyes red and swollen. Dark shadows rested beneath them, making her look older, drained. When she finally stood, John noticed faint bruised fingerprints on her wrist, long, dark marks that didn't belong to him. She pulled her sleeve down instinctively, avoiding his gaze. "I don't remember everything," she said quietly. "Just pieces, like something was whispering to me all night." John suggested getting some fresh air. They stepped into the hallway, and the moment the apartment door opened, their neighbor across the hall, a middle-aged woman named Mrs. Carter, froze in place. Her grocery bag slipped from her hands, spilling cans onto the floor. "You heard it too, didn't you?" she asked in a hushed voice, her face pale. John felt his stomach drop. "What?" Mrs. Carter glanced nervously toward the stairwell before lowering her voice. "The knocking, the footsteps. It happens sometimes, but never this strong." Another neighbor, Mark, stepped out of his apartment, his jaw tight. "This building's been weird for years, but last night, that was different, like something was walking up and down the halls." John exchanged a look with Emily. This wasn't just happening to them. Later that morning, John checked the balcony. The wooden floorboards were dry, but something else caught his attention. Deep cracks in the wood, shaped almost like claw marks. They hadn't been there before. The maintenance office brushed it off, blaming old construction and temperature changes, but John knew better. The damage followed the exact path of the footprints from the night before. When Emily went to shower, John heard her scream. He rushed in to find her staring at the bathroom mirror. Faint words were etched on the fog on the glass, written as if by an invisible finger. "Don't send me away." Emily collapsed to the floor, shaking violently. She swore she hadn't touched the mirror. Desperate for answers, John spoke to the building's elderly security guard, Mr. Reynolds, who had worked there for decades. The old man grew tense the moment John mentioned the park. "Lincoln Park," he repeated slowly. "There used to be reports years ago. A woman found dead near the north end. No one claimed the body. After that, things started happening." John felt his pulse race. "What kind of things?" Mr. Reynolds lowered his voice. "People hearing singing, couples having nightmares, women getting sick for no reason. Most of them moved out." By the afternoon, Emily developed a fever. She kept murmuring unfamiliar words in her sleep, her voice layered and distant. John sat beside her, gripping her hand, feeling utterly powerless. Daylight hadn't saved them. It had only revealed the truth. This presence wasn't tied to darkness alone. It had a past, a pattern, and Emily was now part of it. By the third night, John knew they could no longer handle this alone. Emily's condition was worsening by the hour. Her fever refused to break, and she drifted in and out of consciousness, murmuring phrases that didn't sound like English. Sometimes her voice shifted, lower, strained, unfamiliar. Each time it happened, John felt a stab of panic, like he was slowly losing her to something unseen. On the recommendation of Mr. Reynolds, John contacted Father Thomas Avery, a retired priest known quietly in the neighborhood for dealing with unusual cases. The man arrived just after sunset, carrying no dramatic tools, no crosses held high, no dramatic gestures, only a small leather bag and a calm, heavy presence. The moment he stepped inside the apartment, he stopped. "It followed you," Father Thomas said plainly, "from the park." John's throat went dry. "What is it?" Father Thomas didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked slowly through the apartment, pausing near the balcony, the hallway, the bedroom. His expression darkened with each step. When he reached Emily, she suddenly opened her eyes. and smiled. It wasn't her smile. "You shouldn't have brought him," she said softly. John froze. Father Thomas didn't flinch. He opened his bag and pulled out a small vial of holy water, sprinkling a few drops near Emily's feet. She screamed, a sound so sharp and layered it echoed unnaturally against the walls. The lights flickered violently, and the temperature plummeted. Father Thomas spoke firmly. "This is not a demon," he said. "It's a bound spirit, a woman who died violently and never crossed over. Something in Emily, her voice, her presence, caught its attention." John felt sick. "Can you remove it?" "Yes," Father Thomas replied, "but not without consequences." He explained that the spirit was anchored, tied to the land near the north end of Lincoln Park, where a woman's body had once been discovered and quietly buried without proper rites. Over time, grief and anger twisted her into something dangerous. She attached herself to people who listened to her, who followed her voice. Emily had followed. To remove the spirit, a cleansing ritual had to be performed at both locations, the apartment and the park. But there was a rule, one that made John's blood run cold. The spirit will resist, it will lie, it will threaten, and it will try to trade. "Trade what?" John asked. "A promise," the priest said. "If you force it out completely, it will lose its connection, but it will try to take something with it, memories, health, or a piece of the person it's attached to." As if reacting to the words, Emily began shaking violently. Her eyes rolled back, and dark veins stood out against her skin. "Don't send me back," she pleaded, her voice layered again. "He belongs to me now." John grabbed Emily's hand, tears burning his eyes. "You don't get to take her." Father Thomas began reciting prayers, his voice steady despite the chaos erupting around them. The walls creaked, the floor vibrated. From the corner of the room, a shadow stretched unnaturally long, pressing against the ceiling like a living thing. When the ritual ended, Emily collapsed, unconscious but breathing steadily. Father Thomas wiped sweat from his brow. "This isn't over," he said grimly. "We weakened it, but the final confrontation must happen at the park." John looked at Emily, then back at the priest. For the first time since this nightmare began, he understood the truth. Saving her would require facing the very place where it all started, and risking never coming back the same. They returned to Lincoln Park just before dawn, when the city was quiet and the sky hovered between darkness and light. A pale mist clung to the ground, curling around the bare trees like breath from something still asleep. John supported Emily as they walked, her weight heavy against him. She looked fragile, drained, yet unnervingly calm. Father Thomas moved ahead of them, his steps deliberate, carrying a lantern that cut a narrow path through the fog. The closer they came to the north end of the park, the colder the air became. John felt it sink into his bones. The sounds of the city faded, replaced by an unnatural stillness. No birds, no distant traffic, nothing. Even the mist seemed to hesitate here, thickening around a small clearing that John recognized instantly. The same place, the same sense of wrongness. Father Thomas stopped and placed the lantern on the ground. He drew a small circle in the dirt, marking it with chalk and prayer beads. "This is where she died, and where she waits." Emily stiffened. Her grip tightened painfully around John's arm. "She's angry," she whispered. "She says you lied." A soft humming drifted through the fog, sweet, familiar, and terrifying. The temperature dropped sharply, and the lantern flame flickered violently. Shadows gathered at the edges of the clearing, stretching and twisting as if pulled by invisible hands. Slowly, a figure emerged from the mist. She looked almost human. A woman stood before them, barefoot, her dress torn and soaked at the hem, as if she had walked through endless water. Her face was pale, her eyes dark with grief rather than rage. For a brief moment, John felt an overwhelming wave of sadness. Then, her neck twisted slightly, unnaturally, and the illusion shattered. "You shouldn't have brought him," she said softly. "You shouldn't have let me stay. She listened to me." Emily cried out, collapsing to her knees. Father Thomas raised his voice, beginning the final prayers. The ground vibrated. Wind tore through the clearing, whipping the trees into violent motion. The woman screamed, not in anger but in despair. The sound pierced John's mind, filling it with images that weren't his own. Loneliness, betrayal, cold earth closing in. "She was buried without a name," Father Thomas shouted over the chaos. Today, she will be released." The spirit lunged towards Emily. John moved without thinking, stepping between them. A crushing weight slammed into John's chest, knocking the air from his lungs. For a moment, he felt her inside his thoughts, searching, clawing, offering. "Stay with me," the voice whispered. "I can make the pain stop." John screamed and forced the words out, repeating Father Thomas's prayers through clenched teeth. Light erupted from the lantern, burning white and fierce. The spirit wailed as cracks of light tore through her form, her shape unraveling like smoke in the wind. With one final agonized cry, she vanished. Silence fell. Emily collapsed into John's arms, unconscious but alive. The fog lifted slowly, the air warming as birds began to sing cautiously, as if the world itself was testing whether it was safe again. Father Thomas sank to his knees, exhausted. "She's gone," he said softly, "but she didn't leave without leaving a mark." Weeks later, Emily recovered, but she was changed. She sometimes woke crying from dreams she couldn't explain. John occasionally heard faint humming when passing Lincoln Park. They never went back. Some wounds heal. Others simply learn how to stay quiet. Life slowly returned to a version of normal, but it was never the same normal John and Emily had known before Lincoln Park. They moved out of the apartment within a month, unable to shake the feeling that the walls still remembered what had happened. Their new place, closer to the suburbs, was brighter, quieter, and surrounded by families. On paper, it was perfect. But trauma doesn't disappear when you change addresses. Emily healed physically, yet something fragile remained beneath the surface. She startled easily at soft sounds. Mirrors made her uncomfortable. She avoided looking at her reflection for too long. Sometimes John would catch her standing by a window late at night, staring into the darkness as if listening for something just beyond hearing. When he asked, she always said the same thing. "I thought I heard a song," but it stopped. John returned to work, burying himself in routine. Meetings, emails, traffic. Ordinary life became a shield, but every now and then small things broke through. A street lamp flickering as he passed beneath it, a sudden cold draft on a warm afternoon, the distant echo of humming carried on the wind, gone the moment he tried to focus on it. They never spoke openly about the spirit again. Saying it out loud felt dangerous, like reopening a door that had been sealed with effort and sacrifice. Father Thomas checked in once, warning them that attachments don't always vanish cleanly. Sometimes, he'd said, they fade. Sometimes they watch. And sometimes they wait. Months later, Emily became pregnant. The news should have been pure joy, and in many ways it was, yet fear crept in quietly, uninvited. Emily began having vivid dreams again, standing in fog, holding a child whose face she could never see. She would wake up crying, clutching her stomach, whispering apologies to no one John could see. Doctors said everything was normal, healthy, stress-related. Then one night, John awoke to the sound of soft humming. Not loud, not threatening, gentle. It came from the baby monitor. His heart nearly stopped. He rushed into the nursery, flipping on the light. The room was empty, peaceful. The monitor was silent, just static. Emily appeared behind him, pale and shaking. "You heard it too," she said. It wasn't a question. From that night on, the humming returned occasionally. Always faint, always brief, never when others were around, never recorded. Just enough to be undeniable. Years later, when their daughter was old enough to speak in full sentences, she pointed one evening toward the backyard, where fog pooled low against the grass. "There's a lady," she said, casually. "She sings when I can't sleep." John felt the blood drain from his face. Emily pulled their daughter close, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "What does the lady want?" Emily asked gently. Their daughter thought for a moment. "She wants us to remember her." That night, John stood at the window long after everyone else had gone to bed, staring into the darkness. He understood then what Father Thomas meant. The spirit was gone, but echoes don't need bodies. Some stories don't end with screams or shadows. They end with whispers, passed quietly from one life to the next, waiting for someone else to listen. Years passed, and the story of Lincoln Park faded into something John rarely spoke about, even to himself. Time softened the sharpest edges of fear, turning memories into distant echoes. Their daughter grew older, cheerful and curious, filling the house with laughter that pushed the shadows into corners where they no longer seemed dangerous. Or so John wanted to believe. One autumn evening, John received an unexpected email while sorting through old files at work. The subject line read, "Unidentified remains, Lincoln Park case reopened." His hands went cold. The message explained that during renovation work near the north end of the park, construction crews had uncovered human remains, bones wrapped in decayed fabric, buried far deeper than expected. Records showed the body had never been formally identified. No name, no funeral, no closure. John sat back in his chair, staring at the screen. Father Thomas's words returned with terrifying clarity. Some spirits don't disappear, they wait. That night, Emily felt it too. The air inside the house grew heavy, charged with something familiar. The humming returned, not soft this time, but clear and steady, drifting through the hallways like a memory refusing to fade. Their daughter, now old enough to understand fear, covered her ears. "She's sad," the child whispered. "She says she's cold." John knew they couldn't ignore it anymore. They returned to Lincoln Park one last time, not at night, not in secrecy, but in daylight. The park was busy, alive with joggers, families, and dogs chasing fallen leaves. Yet beneath the normalcy, John felt it, the same pull, the same invisible weight pressing against his chest. Near the construction site stood a temporary memorial, flowers, candles, and a small sign reading, "Unknown Woman." Emily stepped forward, tears streaming silently down her face. She placed a scarf gently among the flowers. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "We didn't know your name, but you mattered." The wind stirred softly. For the first time in years, John felt something shift. Not fear, not dread, but release. The air warmed. The park felt lighter. That night, the humming stopped. Completely. Weeks turned into months. The nightmares ended. Their daughter slept peacefully. Life moved forward without whispers or shadows trailing behind it. The remains were finally identified, given a name, and laid to rest properly. Yet John never forgot the lesson carved into his soul. Some horrors aren't born from evil, but from neglect, from silence, from stories left unfinished. Even now, when John walks past old parks or abandoned places, he listens carefully. Not every voice is meant to be followed. Not every song is harmless. And sometimes the dead don't want revenge. They just want to be remembered.